Jake Miller wiped sweat from his forehead as he carefully brushed dirt away from the strange crystal. The artifact glowed with a soft blue light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. He had been working on this dig site for 3 weeks now, and every day brought new mysteries from the ancient ruins of Vixnara Prime. The research vessel, Starbound, orbited high above the planet while Jake and his team explored the surface. Dr. Lisa Park sat nearby, updating her notes on the Universal. Translator. Captain Tony Hayes had dropped them off that morning with strict orders to be careful and call if anything went wrong. Jake had always loved archaeology, but finding alien ruins was beyond his wildest dreams. The structures were unlike anything humans had ever seen. They seemed to shift and change when nobody was looking directly at them. The crystals embedded in the walls hummed with energy that made his skin tingle. This particular crystal was different from the others. It was larger, about the size of a basketball, and its glow was much brighter. Strange symbols covered its surface, symbols that seemed to move and rearrange themselves as Jake watched. He had seen similar markings on other artifacts, but never this complex or active. Lisa looked up from her work and noticed Jake staring at the crystal. She walked over to join him, her boots crunching on the sandy ground of the dig site. The air was thin here, and they both wore breathing masks that made talking a bit difficult. "Find something interesting?" she asked. Adjusting her equipment packed out, Jake nodded and pointed at the symbols. "Look at these markings. They keep changing. I think this might be some kind of communication device, or maybe a computer interface." Lisa pulled out her scanner and ran it over the crystal surface. The readings made her frown. The energy levels are off the charts. Whatever this thing does, it uses a lot of power. Jake felt drawn to touch the crystal. Something about it seemed familiar, like he had seen it before in a dream. The blue light pulsed faster as his hand got closer to its surface. He could feel warmth radiating from it, and the symbols began moving more quickly. "Maybe I should try to activate it," Jake said. "If it's a communication device, we might be able to learn something about the people who built this place." Lisa looked worried. "Are you sure that's safe? We don't know what it does or how it works." But Jake was already reaching out to touch the crystal. As soon as his fingers made contact with its surface, the world exploded in light and sound. The crystal's glow became blinding white, and a deep humming filled the air. The ground beneath their feet began to vibrate, and the ancient walls around them started to glow with the same blue light. Jake tried to pull his hand away, but he couldn't. The crystal held him like a magnet, and energy flowed through his body. He felt dizzy and strange, like he was floating, even though his feet were still on the ground. Images flashed through his mind, images of tall, beautiful beings with silver skin and golden eyes. The humming grew louder and changed into what sounded like music or singing. The symbols on the crystal were spinning now, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. Lisa was shouting something, but Jake couldn't hear her over the noise. Then everything stopped. The light faded back to its normal blue glow. The humming ceased, and Jake stumbled backward, finally free from the crystal's hold. He felt different somehow, like something had changed inside him. His head was full of new thoughts and feelings that didn't seem to belong to him. Lisa rushed to his side. "Jake, are you okay? What happened?" Before Jake could answer, the air in front of them began to shimmer like heat waves rising from hot pavement. The shimmer grew larger and more solid, until it looked like a doorway made of liquid silver. Through this doorway stepped the most beautiful and terrifying woman Jake had ever seen. She was at least 7 feet tall, with skin that seemed to glow from within. Her hair was long and white, flowing around her shoulders like it was underwater. Her eyes were large and golden, with no visible pupils, and they seemed to look right through Jake's soul. She wore armor that looked like it was made of the same crystal material, and in her hand was a weapon that crackled with electric energy. The woman looked around the dig site, taking in the ancient ruins and the two humans staring at her in shock. When her gaze fell on Jake, her expression changed from confusion to something that might have been joy or recognition. She spoke in a voice that was like music and thunder at the same time. The words were in a language Jake had never heard before, but somehow he understood them perfectly. She was asking if he was the one who had called to her across the dimensions. Jake opened his mouth to explain that he didn't know what she was talking about, but different words came out. He found himself speaking in her language, telling her that yes, he had called to her, and he was honored by her presence. These weren't his thoughts, but somehow they were coming from his mouth. Lisa was frantically working with her translator, trying to understand what was happening. The device was beeping and flashing error messages, completely unable to process the alien language. The tall woman smiled, showing teeth that were sharp and white like a predator's. She took a step closer to Jake and spoke again. This time Jake understood that she was accepting his proposal and agreeing to become his mate. She introduced herself as Kirithel Vex, warrior of the Vexnari people. Jake tried to explain that there had been a mistake, but the words that came out of his mouth were formal acceptance of her acceptance. He was speaking in perfect Vexnari, agreeing to all the terms of what seemed to be some kind of marriage contract. Kira smiled wider and raised her weapon to the sky. She shouted something that made the air itself ring like a bell. In response, more shimmers appeared in the air. Around them, ships began materializing overhead, huge and strange vessels that looked like they were made of the same crystal material as the ruins. Lisa grabbed Jake's arm. "We need to contact Captain Hayes right now. This is way beyond anything we were prepared for." But it was too late. Kira had begun some kind of ceremony, chanting in her musical voice, while the ships above them hummed in harmony. Jake felt the same strange energy that had flowed through him when he touched the crystal, only stronger now. It was connecting him to Kira in ways he didn't understand. As the ceremony continued, Jake realized that his simple archaeological expedition had just become something much more complicated. He had accidentally gotten engaged to an alien warrior princess, and her entire people were apparently coming to attend the wedding. The last thing he remembered before everything changed was Lisa shouting into her communicator, trying to explain to Captain Hayes that they needed immediate evacuation because Jake had somehow started an interdimensional marriage ceremony. Captain Tony Hayes stared out the viewport of the Starbound at the growing fleet of alien ships surrounding his vessel. In 30 years of space exploration, he had never seen anything like them. The ships looked like they were carved from giant crystals, glowing with the same blue light as the ruins on the planet below. Down in the research lab, Lisa was working frantically with every translation device they had. Jake sat in a chair nearby, looking confused and worried. Every few minutes, he would say something in the alien language without meaning to, as if the words were just popping into his head. "I don't understand what's happening to me," Jake said, rubbing his temples. "It's like there's someone else in my head speaking for me." Lisa looked up from her equipment. "The scans show that your brain activity has changed. There are new neural pathways that weren't there before. I think that crystal did something to you when you touched it." Jake tried to remember exactly what had happened, but his memories of touching the crystal were fuzzy. He remembered the light and the music, and then suddenly understanding a language he had never heard before. But the strangest part was that he seemed to know things about Vexnari culture that he had never learned. He knew, for example, that Kirithel Vex was not just any warrior. She was one of the elite guards who protected the dimensional barriers between worlds. He knew that the Vexnari people lived for thousands of years, and that they chose their mates through complex rituals that involved psychic bonding. He also knew that once a Vexnari accepted a mating proposal, Breaking the bond could start a war between dimensions. "Lisa," Jake said slowly, "I think I'm in serious trouble." Before Lisa could respond, the ship's communication system crackled to life. Captain Hayes' voice came through the speakers, sounding stressed and tired. "Dr. Miller, Dr. Park, please report to the bridge immediately. We have a situation up here." When Jake and Lisa arrived at the bridge, they found Captain Hayes talking to a holographic projection of an elderly Vixnari. The alien was tall and thin, with silver skin covered in intricate tattoos that seemed to move on their own. His golden eyes held ancient wisdom and not a small amount of annoyance. "This is Elder Zephmar," Captain Hayes explained. "He's been trying to explain the situation to me, but I'm afraid I'm not following most of it." The elder looked at Jake and spoke in his musical language. Jake found himself understanding every word and responding automatically. "He says that I have invoked the sacred bond of eternal unity," Jake translated, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. "By touching the heart crystal and calling across dimensions, I have formally proposed marriage to Kirathel Vex according to ancient law." Lisa's eyes widened. "You proposed marriage, but you just touched a crystal." Jake nodded helplessly. "Apparently. Among the Vexnari, touching a heart crystal while thinking of someone is the same as asking them to marry you. And when she appeared, and I spoke to her in their language, I was accepting all the traditional terms of their marriage contract." The elder continued speaking, and Jake's face grew pale as he translated. "He says that the bonding ceremony must be completed within 7 solar cycles, or the rejection will be seen as an insult to their entire people. This could lead to what he calls a dimensional cleansing of our species." Captain Hayes sat down heavily in his chair. "So you're telling me that if you don't marry this alien warrior woman, her people might declare war on humanity?" "That's about right," Jake said miserably. The elder gestured, and the hologram changed to show Kirathel Vex. She was standing in what looked like a crystal cathedral, surrounded by other Vixnari warriors. She was speaking to them in an excited voice, apparently describing her new mate to her friends and family. "She seems happy about it," Lisa observed. Jake watched Kira on the screen and felt something strange in his chest. Despite the terrifying situation, there was something about her that drew him in. When she smiled, her whole face lit up in a way that made her look less like a dangerous warrior and more like an excited young woman. The elder spoke again, and Jake translated. "He says that if I am willing to go through with the ceremony, I must prove my worth through the traditional trials. These include tests of courage, wisdom, and combat skill." "Combat?" Captain Hayes asked weakly. Jake nodded. "Apparently, Vexnari marriages are not just about love. They're also about creating strong partnerships for battle. Both mates must be able to protect each other and fight together as a team." Over the next 3 days, Jake found himself going through the strangest wedding preparations of his life. The Vexnari had transported him to their main ship, which was like a floating crystal palace. Everything was beautiful and slightly overwhelming, with walls that shifted color based on the emotions of the people nearby. Kira was patient with him as he struggled through the trials. The test of wisdom involved solving complex puzzles that required understanding Vexnari philosophy. The test of courage required him to walk through a room filled with illusions of his worst fears. But it was the combat trial that worried him most. "I'm an archaeologist," Jake explained to Kira as she handed him a crystal weapon. "I dig up old things. I don't fight people." Kira smiled and said something in her language. Jake was surprised to find that he was beginning to understand her without the words just appearing in his head. The psychic bond was growing stronger. "You do not fight people," she agreed in broken English, which she was learning from him just as he was learning. Her language, "You fight me," is better. A combat trial was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. Kira moved like water and struck like lightning, but she was clearly holding back, teaching him rather than trying to defeat him. As they fought, Jake began to understand that for the Vexnari, combat was a form of communication. Every move told a story. Every strike was a question, and every block was an answer. By the end of the trial, Jake was exhausted but exhilarated. He had never felt so alive or so connected to another person. The psychic bond between them was complete now, and he could feel Kira's emotions as clearly as his own. She was proud of him, but more than that, she was genuinely fond of him. The wedding ceremony itself was beautiful and terrifying. Jake stood in the Crystal Cathedral while hundreds of Vexnari warriors watched. Kira looked magnificent in her ceremonial armor, which was decorated with symbols that told the story of her family line going back thousands of years. Elder Zefmer performed the ceremony, chanting in the ancient language while crystals all around them pulsed with light. Jake felt the psychic bond growing even stronger, connecting not just his mind to Kira's, but his very soul. When it was over, Jake found that he could see things he had never seen before. The world had extra dimensions that his human eyes had never been able to perceive. Colors had new meanings, and sounds carried emotions, along with information. Kira took his hand and smiled. In his mind, he heard her voice as clearly as if she had spoken aloud. "Now we are one," she said. "Where you go, I go. What threatens you, threatens me. We are bonded until the stars grow cold." Jake looked into her golden eyes and realized that, despite the bizarre circumstances, he was genuinely happy. This strange, fierce, beautiful woman was now his wife, and he was surprised to discover that he wouldn't have it any other way. The celebration was interrupted by alarms. Elder Zefmer rushed to a crystal display that showed space around their fleet. Dark ships were approaching, ships that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Shadow more," Kira hissed, her hand moving to her weapon. "Ancient enemies of my people. They seek to destroy the barriers between dimensions." Jake felt Kira's battle rage through their bond, and his own protective instincts flared to life. Without thinking, he picked up a crystal weapon and stood beside his new wife. "Well," he said, surprising himself with how calm he sounded, "I guess it's time to see how well we fight together." Kira's smile was fierce and proud. "Yes, husband. Time to show them what humans can do." 3 years had passed since Jake Miller accidentally married an interdimensional warrior princess, and he was still getting used to married life. The Starbound had been modified with Vexnari technology, creating living quarters that existed in multiple dimensions at once. Jake's morning routine now included checking that all the furniture was properly anchored in the correct reality. Kira had adapted to human customs with surprising enthusiasm. She had learned to drink coffee, though she still preferred it strong, enough to dissolve metal. She watched human movies with fascination, especially action films, which she critiqued for their unrealistic fight scenes. Her favorite Earth food was pizza, which she claimed reminded her of battle rations from her home. Dimension. Jake had become something of a celebrity in both human and Vexnari space. His archaeological work, combined with his unique insights into dimensional physics, had revolutionized the field. Universities across human space wanted him to lecture, while Vexnari scholars sought his advice on understanding human culture. But everything changed the day Kira told him she was pregnant. "Pregnant," Jake had repeated, sitting down heavily on their dimensional couch. "With twins." Kira had nodded, her golden eyes glowing with happiness. 2 children. 1 boy, 1 girl. Very strong, very loud. Loud, Jake had asked. "Vexnari babies. Scream across dimensions," Kira explained casually. "Is normal. You will see." Dr. Lisa Park, now Jake's research partner, and the closest thing they had to a family doctor, ran every test she could think of. The babies were healthy, but their scans showed energy patterns unlike anything she had ever seen. Their cellular structure is incredible, Lisa explained to Jake and Kira during one of the checkups. They have human DNA, but it's been modified by Vexnari energy. They're going to be able to do things that neither species can do alone. The birth was an event that Captain Tony Hayes would never forget. He had seen space battles, alien invasions, and phenomena that defied explanation, but nothing had prepared him for the night Luna and Max Miller came into the world. Kira's labor pains created ripples in the fabric of space-time. Every contraction opened tiny portals to other dimensions, through which curious alien faces peered at the proceedings. The ship's engines had to be shut down because the baby's heartbeats were interfering with the power systems. When Luna was born, she immediately phased through the doctor's hands and fell through the delivery table. Jake dove to catch her, passing his arms through solid matter for the first time in his life. When Max followed 10 minutes later, his first cry shattered every piece of glass on the ship and opened a portal that sucked in 3 maintenance robots. From the engine room, "Well," Captain Hayes said, looking at the chaos around him, "this is going to be interesting." He had no idea how right he was. Luna Miller could phase through solid objects, but only when she was excited or happy. This led to numerous incidents where she would fall through her crib during playtime, or walk through walls while chasing the family cat. Jake learned to baby-proof their quarters by assuming that no barrier could actually contain his daughter, Max. Miller had inherited his mother's vocal abilities, but with human lung capacity and creativity. His crying could be heard across dimensional barriers, leading to confused calls from parallel universes asking who was making all that noise. His laughter created temporal echoes that made the same joke funny for hours after he stopped giggling. Both children had golden eyes like their mother, but they changed color based on their moods. When they were happy, their eyes glowed soft blue like human skies. When they were angry, they flashed red like warning lights. When they were curious, they shifted through the entire spectrum like rainbow prisms. Jake discovered that parenting half-alien children required skills he had never developed. Traditional baby books didn't cover topics like what to do when your toddler accidentally phases into the ventilation system, or how to comfort a crying baby whose tears fall upward. The ship's crew adapted as best they could. Engineer Danny Fox learned to build toys that could exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Navigator Amy Chun started plotting courses that avoided areas where the children's abilities might interfere with critical systems. Even the ship's computer had to be reprogrammed to account for Max's voice commands, which it interpreted literally even when he was just babbling. Lisa became the children's favorite aunt, an unofficial child development expert. She spent hours studying how their abilities worked and developing ways to help them control their powers. Luna phases when she's emotionally excited, Lisa explained to Jake and Kira during one of their family meetings. We need to teach her meditation techniques to help her stay solid when she wants to. And Max? Kira asked, bouncing her son on her knee while he gurgled happily in 3 different languages. Max's voice affects reality based on his intentions. Lisa said, right now he doesn't know he's doing it, so his emotions just broadcast everywhere. We need to teach him to focus his thoughts before he speaks. This was easier said than done. Luna's phasing abilities made traditional discipline impossible. How do you give a timeout to a child who can walk through walls? Jake tried building a special chair that existed in multiple dimensions at once, but Luna just phased to a dimension where the chair didn't exist and wandered off. Max's vocal abilities created different challenges. His bedtime stories literally came to life, populating their quarters with friendly monsters and talking furniture. Jake would come home from work to find their living room full of singing teacups and dancing books, all of which refused to return to being inanimate objects. The worst incident happened when the twins were 2 years old. Jake and Kira had left them with Lisa for an hour while they attended a scientific conference via hologram. When they returned, they found their quarters filled with interdimensional dolphins. How? Jake asked, staring at a group of highly intelligent cetaceans who were discussing quantum physics in squeaks and clicks. Lisa looked embarrassed. Luna phased through a wall and found the dimensional portal controls. Max got excited about her adventure and started telling a story about swimming with space dolphins. The combination of her phasing ability and his reality-affecting voice opened a stable portal to a dimension where dolphins evolved to become the dominant spacefaring species. The dolphins were friendly and fascinated by the strange land mammals they had discovered. They spent hours asking questions about human culture, while their own scientists took readings on the children's unique abilities. It took 3 days to convince them to return to their own dimension, and even then, they left behind a small research station for future cultural exchanges. Captain Hayes found Jake sitting in his office that evening, staring out at the stars with a tired expression. "Rough day?" the captain asked. Jake nodded. "I used to think archaeology was challenging. Digging up ancient civilizations, deciphering lost languages, piecing together the mysteries of the past. That was nothing compared to this. Having second thoughts about the whole family thing." Jake was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "No, it's terrifying and exhausting and completely insane, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. When Luna phases through a wall and gives me a hug that exists in 6 dimensions at once, or when Max tells me he loves me and his words make flowers grow in the hallway, I remember why this is all worth it." That night, as Jake and Kira tucked their children into bed, Luna grabbed her father's hand and looked at him with her shifting golden eyes. "Daddy," she said in her sweet 3-year-old voice, "are we different from other families?" Jake glanced at Kira, who smiled and nodded encouragingly. He looked back at his daughter, whose hand was currently phased through his while somehow still holding it. "Yes, sweetheart," he said, "we're very different. But different doesn't mean wrong. It just means we have our own special way of being a family." Max, who was lying in his crib making his nightlight float in lazy circles above his head, giggled and said, "Special family." As he spoke, a warm golden light filled the room, and for a moment, everything was perfect. Jake realized that no matter how chaotic their lives became, no matter how many dimensions his children accidentally opened, or how many interdimensional incidents they caused, this was exactly where he was meant to be, even if bedtime stories did tend to come to life and redecorate the ship. Jake stared at the rejection letter from the Mars Colony Educational System and sighed. It was the 15th school to turn down Luna and Max Miller, and he was running out of options. The letter was polite but firm, explaining that their facilities were not equipped to handle students with unique dimensional requirements. Kira looked up from her morning combat practice routine, which she performed in their quarters using weapons that existed in 4 dimensions simultaneously. Sweat made her silver skin gleam, and her golden eyes showed concern for her husband's frustration. "Perhaps human schools are not right for our children," she suggested, spinning a crystal blade that cut through space itself. "Vexnari academies have experience with dimensional abilities." Jake shook his head. "I visited 3 Vexnari schools last month. They're designed for children who think logically and follow strict warrior codes. Luna and Max are too human for that. They're creative and emotional and curious about everything. The instructors didn't know what to do with them." Dr. Lisa Park entered their quarters carrying a cup of coffee and a data pad full of educational research. As the children's unofficial aunt and the ship's expert on hybrid development, she had been helping Jake and Kira search for schooling options. "Any luck with the applications?" she asked, though Jake's expression already told her the answer. Nothing, Jake said. Human schools can't handle children who phase through walls and accidentally summon interdimensional creatures. Vexnari schools don't understand children who ask questions like, why do we have to fight? And what if we made friends with our enemies instead? As if summoned by their conversation, Luna and Max came running into the room. At 8 years old, they had grown into their abilities, but not yet learned to fully control them. Luna was currently phased halfway through the floor, with only her upper body visible above the deck plating. Max was floating 3 feet off the ground, having gotten excited about something and unconsciously started defying gravity. "Daddy," Luna called out, her voice echoing strangely because half of her vocal cords were in a different dimension. Max made the breakfast machine sing opera again. Max looked defensive, settling slowly back to the floor. "I was just asking for pancakes." "It's not my fault the food processor likes music." Jake rubbed his temples. The ship's food preparation system had been acting up ever since Max started. Talking to it. The boy's voice could influence any electronic device, and his cheerful personality had somehow given the kitchen equipment a love of Italian opera. "Did you at least get your breakfast?" Jake asked. "Yes," Max said proudly, and the pancakes were shaped like musical notes. Kira finished her practice routine and joined the family discussion. "Perhaps we should teach them ourselves." The Starbound is large enough to be a school. Jake had been thinking the same thing. The research vessel had been modified so many times over the years that it was now part human ship, part Vexnari crystal palace, and part interdimensional laboratory. There was certainly enough space for classrooms. We could set up different areas for different subjects, Lisa suggested, warming to the idea. The observatory for astronomy, the archaeology lab for history and culture, the engineering deck for science and mathematics. Luna clapped her hands with excitement, accidentally phasing through the floor entirely and ending up hanging from the ceiling of the deck below. Her muffled voice came through the floor plating. "That sounds amazing. Can we have art class in the Dimensional Garden?" The Dimensional Garden was one of Kira's additions to the ship. It existed in 7 different realities at once, allowing plants from multiple worlds to grow together in impossible combinations. Flowers that bloomed with starlight grew next to. Trees that sang in harmony with the cosmic background radiation. Max bounced up and down, his excitement making small objects around the room float sympathetically. "Can I help teach?" "I know lots of things." "Like what?" Jake asked, catching a floating coffee mug before it drifted into the wall. "I know how to talk to computers and make them happy," Max said seriously. "And I know which dimensions have the best ice cream." Lisa laughed. "That's actually useful information." Over the next few weeks, the family transformed the Starbound into the most unusual school in known space. Jake set up history and language classes in the archaeology lab, surrounded by artifacts from dozens of civilizations. Kira taught physical education and dimensional theory in the modified cargo bay, which had been expanded to include training areas that existed in multiple realities at once. Lisa created science laboratories that could demonstrate principles of physics that most universities could only discuss theoretically. When she taught the children about parallel dimensions, she could actually open portals to show them examples. Captain Tony Hayes, who had watched Jake and Kira's family grow with a mixture of amusement and terror, volunteered to teach navigation and space travel. Engineer Danny Fox offered to show the children how the ship's systems worked, though he insisted on safety protocols after Max accidentally turned the main computer into a jazz musician for 3 days. The children thrived in their unique educational environment. Luna learned to control her phasing by practicing meditation in the Dimensional Garden, where existing in multiple realities at once felt natural and peaceful. She developed an amazing ability to see connections between different subjects, literally viewing problems from multiple dimensional perspectives. Max discovered that his reality-affecting voice worked best when he understood exactly what he was trying to accomplish. Lisa taught him to think carefully before speaking, and soon he could help with experiments by simply describing the results he wanted to achieve. But their education created unexpected complications. Luna's growing mastery of dimensional phasing allowed her to see into parallel realities, leading to awkward moments during family dinner. In the universe next door, Captain Hayes has a pet space octopus, she announced one evening while passing. The salt through 4 dimensions at once. Captain Hayes nearly choked on his food. A what? It's purple and very smart, Luna continued innocently. It helps him navigate asteroid fields. You should get one. Max's expanding control over his voice led to different problems. His homework assignments literally came to life, creating a classroom full of mathematical equations that solved themselves and history lessons that reenacted famous battles with floating holographic soldiers. The situation escalated when the children decided to collaborate on a science project about interdimensional communication. Luna phased into multiple realities simultaneously, while Max broadcasted a greeting message across all dimensions. Their combined abilities created a stable communication network that connected thousands of parallel universes. Jake found them in the science lab, surrounded by floating screens showing different versions of their family from alternate realities. In one screen, Jake was a pirate captain married to a robot version of Kira. In another, Kira was human, and Jake had blue skin and tentacles. Children, Jake said carefully, what exactly are you doing? We're meeting our other selves, Luna explained, waving at a screen that showed a version of herself with wings. Did you know that in universe number 47, you're a professional musician and Mom is a chef? Max was having an animated conversation with an alternate version of himself, who appeared to be made of living crystal. He says their version of the Starbound is powered by singing. Want to hear? Before Jake could stop him, Max began humming a tune that his other self had taught him. The ship's engines immediately shifted to match the harmony, and the entire vessel began glowing with musical energy. Lisa rushed into the lab just as the navigation system started composing a symphony. What did they do this time? Jake gestured helplessly at the screens full of alternate realities. They've turned our children's science project into the universe's first interdimensional social network. The screens were multiplying, showing more and more versions of their family. Some were funny, like the reality where everyone was tiny and lived in a dollhouse version of the Starbound. Others were more serious, showing versions where Jake and Kira were leading resistance movements against tyrannical governments. Captain Hayes arrived on the scene just as a screen opened, showing a version of him dressed as a space cowboy riding a rocket-powered horse. I don't want to know, he said, closing his eyes. Just tell me when it's safe to open them again. It took 3 hours to convince all the alternate versions of themselves to close the communication network. Some of the other families were reluctant to end the conversation, especially the versions from realities where they were separated by war or distance. As the last screen flickered out, Luna looked disappointed. I wanted to learn more about the universe where we're all dragons. Max nodded sadly. And I wanted to teach our crystal selves how to make pizza. Jake sat down and pulled both children onto his lap. I know it's exciting to meet other versions of ourselves, but we need to be careful. Opening too many dimensional portals could be dangerous. But it was educational, Luna protested. We learned so much about parallel physics and alternate reality theory. And we made friends, Max added. The dragon version of you promised to visit for my birthday. Kira joined them, having finished repairing the damage to the ship's systems. Her expression was thoughtful as Elder Zephmir's holographic image flickered with urgency as he materialized on the bridge of the Starbound. His ancient golden eyes held worry that Jake had never seen before, and his usually calm demeanor was replaced by something approaching. Panic. "Jake Miller," the elder said without his usual formal greetings. "We must speak immediately. Your children are in great danger." Jake felt Kira tense beside him through their psychic bond. Captain Tony Hayes looked up from his navigation console with concern, while Dr. Lisa Park paused her research to listen. Luna and Max were in their quarters, supposedly doing homework, but probably turning their math problems into living creatures again. "What kind of danger?" Jake asked, though he had been dreading this conversation for months. The children's abilities had been growing stronger every day, and their latest experiments with interdimensional communication had attracted attention from across the galaxy. Elder Zeefmer gestured, and the hologram expanded to show a star map filled with moving lights. Ships from dozens of different species were converging on their location from all directions. "Ancient prophecies speak of hybrid beings who would bridge the gaps between dimensions," the elder explained. "Your children match these prophecies." "Exactly. Some believe they will unite all realities in peace. Others fear they will tear the barriers between worlds apart and destroy everything." Kira's hand moved instinctively to her weapon. "Who comes for them?" "Everyone," Elder Zeefmer replied grimly. "Human military forces want to study them as potential weapons. Vexnari traditionalists believe they are abominations that must be destroyed. The Shadowmoor seek to corrupt them and use their power to consume all dimensions. And there are others, beings from dead realities, who see the children as their only hope for resurrection." Jake felt sick. He had always known this day might come, but he had hoped they would have more time. Luna and Max were still just children, 8 years old and more interested in playing games than reshaping the universe. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Hours," Elder Zeefmer said. "The first ships will arrive soon. You must decide quickly what you will do." Captain Hayes was all ready, running calculations on his navigation computer. "We could run. The Starbound is fast, and with the dimensional modifications, we could probably stay ahead of them for a while." "Running will not solve the problem," Kira said, her warrior instincts taking over. "They will never stop hunting our children. We must face this threat directly." Jake looked out at the stars and thought about his family. Luna, who could see beauty in every dimension and wanted to make friends with everyone she met. Max, whose voice could reshape reality, but who used it mostly to make flowers grow and help lonely computers feel happy. They were powerful beyond imagination, but they were also innocent and kind. "There's a third option," Jake said slowly. "We tell them the truth and let them choose for themselves." Lisa looked shocked. "Jake, they're 8 years old. This is too much responsibility for children." "They're not normal children," Jake replied. "They never have been. Maybe it's time we stopped pretending they are." An hour later, the family gathered in their quarters. Jake and Kira sat across from Luna and Max, while Lisa stood nearby with her medical scanners. The children could sense the tension in the room, and their eyes were shifting between worried blue and curious gold. "Are we in trouble?" Luna asked, unconsciously phasing halfway through her chair. "Not trouble exactly," Jake said carefully. "But we need to talk about your abilities and what they mean for the universe." He explained about the prophecies and the approaching ships as simply as he could. The children listened with growing amazement and concern, their eyes shifting through the entire spectrum as they processed the information. "So people want to hurt us because we're different," Max said, his voice making the furniture vibrate slightly. "Some people," Kira confirmed, "but others want to help. The problem is that your powers are growing stronger, and some beings fear what might happen if you cannot control them." Luna phased completely out of her chair and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars. "I can see them coming," she said quietly. ships from lots of different dimensions. Some of the people are scared, some are angry, and some are hopeful. Max joined his sister at the window. Without thinking, he began humming a soft tune that somehow conveyed sadness and understanding. As his voice filled the room, Jake felt tears in his eyes. His son was singing about loneliness and fear and the desire to belong somewhere. "What do you want to do?" Jake asked his children about Luna, and Max looked at each other with a kind of silent communication that twins share. Luna reached out and took her brother's hand, and suddenly the room filled with a warm, golden light that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "We want to meet them," Luna said. "All of them. Maybe if they see that we're just kids who want to help, they won't be so scared." "But what if they try to hurt you?" Lisa asked. Max smiled, and his voice carried certainty that seemed to resonate through multiple dimensions. "They won't hurt us. We won't let them." The first ship to arrive was a massive human dreadnought bristling with weapons. It was followed by a Vexnari battlecruiser, then ships from species Jake had never seen before. Within hours, the Starbound was surrounded by a fleet representing dozens of civilizations. Captain Hayes received hundreds of communication requests demanding to speak with the children. Some were polite, others were threatening, and a few were simply curious. But before anyone could decide how to respond, Luna and Max made the decision for them. The children walked onto the bridge hand in hand, their eyes glowing with soft golden light. Without asking permission, Max began to speak, his voice somehow reaching every ship in the fleet simultaneously. "Hello," he said simply. "We know you're scared of us, but we don't want to hurt anyone. We just want to be friends." Luna stepped forward, and as she did, she began phasing through multiple dimensions at once. Suddenly, every being in the fleet could see her clearly, regardless of what reality they existed in. "We can see all of you," she said, her voice carrying across dimensional barriers. "You're all so different and beautiful. We want to learn about your worlds and your cultures." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Instead of attacking or demanding surrender, the representatives from various species began talking to each other for the first time in centuries. Luna's ability to exist in multiple dimensions allowed beings who could never normally communicate to see and understand each other. Max's reality-affecting voice created a space where all languages were automatically translated and all beings felt safe to express their true thoughts. Ancient enemies found themselves having civil conversations, while species that had never met began forming new friendships. Jake watched in amazement as his children did something that countless diplomats and politicians had failed to achieve. They were bringing together beings from across the galaxy simply by being themselves, curious and kind and genuinely interested in others. Elder Zifmer appeared beside Jake, his holographic form shimmering with what looked like tears of joy. "The prophecies spoke truth," he said quietly. "Your children are not weapons or threats. They are bridges. They can help us all understand each other in ways we never thought possible." The impromptu peace conference lasted for 3 days. Luna and Max moved between the ships, meeting with representatives from dozens of species and learning about their cultures and concerns. Wherever they went, conflicts that had lasted for generations began to resolve themselves. On the final day, the children stood before the assembled fleet and made a proposal that would change the course of galactic history. "We want to travel," Luna announced, "to visit all your worlds and meet all your people." "We want to help everyone be friends," Max added, his voice creating harmonious echoes that made everyone listening feel hopeful. Jake felt a mixture of pride and sadness. His children were ready to take on responsibilities that would span that galaxy, but they were still so young. Kira took his hand and spoke through their psychic bond. "They will not be alone. We go with them as a family." Captain Hayes stepped forward with a grin. Well, I suppose the Starbound could use a new mission. Interdimensional diplomacy sounds like an adventure. Lisa nodded enthusiastically. Think of the research opportunities. We could study peaceful interaction between species that have never met before. As the fleet began to disperse, with many of the ships forming a new coalition for mutual cooperation, Jake realized that his accidental marriage to an alien warrior had led to something incredible. His family had become living proof that love and understanding could transcend any barrier, whether it was species, dimension, or ancient hatred. That evening, as they prepared for their new role as galactic ambassadors, Jake tucked Luna and Max into bed for what might be the last time in their familiar quarters. "Daddy," Luna said, her eyes shifting to a peaceful blue, "are you proud of us?" Jake smiled and kissed her forehead. "More proud than you can imagine, sweetheart." Max yawned and settled into his pillows. "Tomorrow we're going to see the crystal. People's world. They'd promised to show us how they grow buildings out of music." As Jake turned off the lights, he reflected on how much his life had changed since that day. He